Good day. Today I'm going to talk about luminance subframes and why they are obsolete given our modern image processing tools. I'll explain the basis for their going obsolete as well as demonstrate that they have done so. The purpose of this research is to answer two questions. Why do we start augmenting our RGB images with LCMs in the first place if we're going to abandon them now, as I suggest? Second, is that motivation still present given our modern equipment and software? In order to address this question, the first thing we have to do is understand the RGB color space and its relationship to other color spaces. Yes, there are a wide variety of color spaces, a small number of which are shown in this diagram. The RGB, which sits here, is related to these other color spaces by various mathematical transformations. Why do we have all these color spaces? One of the reasons is they're used for different purposes. Researchers in human vision may use a different color space than an artist uses in order to plan and execute their artwork. People who design and build display devices for our computers or for printing use a different color space in order to work with their devices. So in image processing, however, we use RGB and sRGB, the two here and here. In image processing, of course, we capture our images through RGB filters. So RGB color space is natural. And we do most of our image processing in that color space, though our programs shift to other color spaces when they need to in order to execute a command we've issued. And they do that without telling us that they're doing it. Sometimes it's hard to know that you're not working anymore in RGB color space. Now, for instance, there is no L in the RGB color space, as you can see, but there is an L up here in the LAB color space. So if we wanted to add L information into an RGB image, we would perhaps transform first into an XYZ color space and then into an LAB color space, insert that new L as a new layer in this LAB color space, and then convert back to RGB. That may go on behind the scenes, and we may never realize that we've made those conversions to those different color spaces. But for instance, if we do something like that and we add an L to a color space, let's say it's a bright L, and in the RGB space when we get back, our pixel values have changed. For instance, maybe one of the pixels has a value of 200 in red, 10 in blue, 10 in green, and 50 in blue. Yeah, and it might become 240, 160, but that's with luminance injected. But it's still entirely an RGB pixel. It's 240, 110. There is no L component expressly stated in that. It's RGB, and that's all it is. So an RGB image only has 3 layers, but somehow the idea arose that there's a separate L layer. At least people often discuss images as if there's a separate L layer. Clearly there isn't. All the detail you see in a final published RGB image, and that's by you, by Hubble telescope people, or whatever, it's all captured in just those 3 layers. So this may seem obvious, but misconceptions. For example, here's some quotes that I got off of Cloudy Night. Quote, for LRGB imaging, the detail comes from the L channel. You want luminance for the detail, and RGB for the color. Color lacks detail. Well, color can't lack detail if all we have is a color image, RGB pixels. There you go. This misconception dates back at least to 2005. I can't find the exact origins of it. But in 2005, a popular book, The Handbook of Image Processing, asserts L is where the detail resides. The famous image processor Robert Gendler, in a Sky and Telescope article in 2015, described L will provide almost all of the detail and contrast to the final L-RGB image. David Payne, who authored Generalized Hyperbolic Stretch Tool in PixInsight, twice in a YouTube presentation to a club I'm a member of, said that we add L for detail. All of these are clearly false. Go into a curves program, we see, for instance, down here in the lower left in the yellow box, R, G, and B channels, and this manipulates all three simultaneously. And then we see other things like L, A, B. Those are from other things like Luminance and the lab color spaces L, A, and B, and C, H, and S, which are hue, saturation, and color, which are from other color spaces. Anything we can do in any of these color spaces, we can do here because we always adjust the RGB pixel values. These are here just to facilitate and make things easier for us to manipulate sometimes. But we can manipulate the curves, the RGB curves, the contrast we want, and to get a good leg up on extracting the detail. If it were true that all the detail was in L and there was no detail in RGB, then nature photographers would take L images when they're taking pictures of the whiskers of a lion or a butterfly wing or what have you, because they couldn't capture it if they didn't take the L. Well, they don't, because of course RGB already has that information in it. Color imagers would only be able to capture puffy colors. There's probably without stars for their images, and they capture details. We know that that's idea is false, but it persists. Now, where did it arise? This is my best guess. A search of the literature did not turn up the exact answer, but there's some things we know. And one is, as we collect more L subs and stack them, the resulting grayscale L image, the noise decreases as 1 over the square root of n, where n is the number of subframes we've captured. As noise decreases in this stacked image, the signal-to-noise ratio obviously improves. Noise goes down, signal sticks up above the noise better. So as signal noise improves, deeper detail is revealed in the image. It was already there. It's revealed by suppressing the noise. And that's why we get the detail by adding the L to the RGB. Is the L suppresses the luminous noise in the RGB image. However, it was incorrectly at some point that the L wasn't suppressing noise, but was actually carrying the detail. The same noise suppression that we can do by capturing a lot of L, we could do by capturing a lot of R, G, and B subs. It would be exactly the same. But L is easier to capture, so the tradition to capture lots of L. That's just the history of it as I believe it happened. But there's another attribute too, another confounding variable in this whole thing, and that is the rods in our eyes can see greater detail than can the cones, the color receptors. If we take a well-processed RGB image and extract the L from it, that is, translate it into a different color space, adding or subtracting nothing from it, and then we look at that L part of that different color space, perhaps the LAB color space, the resulting image, of course, is a grayscale image, and it will appear to have more detail than its parent RGB image from which it was derived, wholly derived. Clearly, it can't have more detail than the RGB, since that's where it came from. So why does it appear to have more resolution? Well, that's our brains and our eyes deceiving us. Nothing we can do about that. But yet, the detail is not in the L, it's in the RGB. And to drive the point home and whip that horse one more time, here's a 21-minute exposure of NTC 5127 Southern Hemisphere in RG and B, 21 minutes each. There's no L introduced into this image, and I believe that there's a lot of detail in this image, so it can't be true that all the detail is in the L. So what really happens when we add L to an RGB image, just so we fully understand? Well, let's say we took images through 4 filters: red, green, blue, and in yellow here, L filter. The red, the green, and the blue pretty much cover the same range of photons as the L filter. If a photon comes in and is captured by the L filter, it would have been captured by at least one of these other filters as well. So the sum, red plus blue plus green, is approximately equal to the same number of photons we would capture in the same length of time with an L filter. Well, the red captured photons obviously go into the red layer, the green into the green layer, and blue into the blue layer. But what happens to when we capture these L photons and want to put them into our RGB image? Well, remarkably, those photons, perhaps millions of them, or at least thousands of them, are distributed into the images without regard for what their actual wavelengths were. 72% of them are dropped into the green layer of the RGB image, 22% into the red, and 6% into the blue. These are numbers that were derived by measurements of the sensitivity of our eyes to different colors, and are not related to the colors of the objects we're actually trying to photograph. For instance, hydrogen alpha clouds have very, very little green in them, and yet you're dumping all the L, almost all the L, into the green layer. And later you try to out of the green, out of the image. A waste of time. In PixInsight, you can adjust these values if you want. In Photoshop, I don't know whether you can adjust them, probably can somewhere or another. But in most programs, other programs, I don't believe there's user access to these numbers. If you capture the L, this is what you're doing. So not only is L not going to improve your color, your detail in your image, but it's going to distort the colors. So to summarize, noise is our actual foe. And one solution would be to capture more images, because stacking a greater number of images suppresses that noise. But it's not the modern approach to handling noise. Now we have modern noise reduction techniques that achieve the same or better elevation of the detail above the noise. For instance, better stacking technologies. Your options to stack, for instance, in PixInsight number 8. There are 8 different ones. And the idea is for those to make a better estimate of what the true pixel value should be, given the scattering and noise in all of the set of pixels in the sum, the corresponding pixels in the sum. But a better option is to use the modern AI noise reduction techniques, such as Noise Exterminator, Topaz Denoise AI, or Deep SNR. The Noise Exterminator is available in PixInsight as is Deep SNR. Noise Exterminator, I believe, also has a add-in for Photoshop, as does Topaz Denoise, which can also be run as a standalone program. But I believe Deep SNR is unique to PixInsight. It's also the only one of the 3 that's free and does a pretty good job. And to a lesser degree, there are other noise reduction techniques. There are manipulations of wavelets, array, and of course, technology in the sensors has improved over the years as well. So, rather than collecting a large number of luminance or a large number of RGB stubs and suppressing the noise by 1 over the square root of n, we can use these technologies to suppress the noise and get in effect, the same result with less effort, less time spent on the telescope, less time spent. So now on to analyses of some actual cases. I'm going to compare two different kinds of images. I'm going to know one is L subcaptured, and this is the luminance captured through a luminance filter. Put a luminance filter in front of your camera and start taking those luminance subs. And stack them all together and stretch them. That's L captured. Then there's L extracted. That's the luminance extracted from an RGB image. We take and capture our R, B, and B, and we stack a whole bunch of them, and then we add R plus G plus B, which covers about the same wavelength span as a luminance filter covers, and we divide that by 3, and we get the L extracted image, and it's we actually don't divide it by 3 to get the L extracted. We just sum those to get the L extracted, and if we want to know what its equivalent exposure time is compared to the L captured, of 1/3. So if we had 1 hour of red, 1 hour of green, 1 hour of blue, we have the equivalent of 1 hour of L captured. Okay, to evaluate my assertion that L captured contains the same detail as RGB already does, I compare L captured to L extracted from the RGB image. To do that, you have to process the L extracted and L captured identically. And here is the processing I do on each one of them. You can read this at your leisure. It's not worth reading over them. So how do I compare them? Once I've processed them, I want to compare these images and make sure or assess whether they have the same amount of detail in the two images. Well, one way to do that is simply to blink the two images together. If you don't see any differences when in the blinked images, that's a good indicator that there aren't any differences in the detail of the two images. You can mathematically take a simple difference between the two images, A and B, the luminance captured and the luminance extracted, add 0.5 to the center of the grayscale, and see if the resulting image is more or less uniform gray. If it is, then A is pretty close to B in terms of its content. So if they were identical, then it would be zero. The whole image would be flat at 0.5 grayscale. But there's actually a quantitative method out there that was developed by a gentleman by the name of Wayne, and it looks at a multi-scale perceptual detail, and it tries to measure the way we see detail in an image and to compare one image's detail to another image's detail. But in any case, any of the applications of these, if there's no difference between the L extracted and the L captured for the same target, then putting the L captured in place of the L extracted, or even making a super L and putting that into the image, cannot possibly enhance the detail to the thing you're replacing, and the thing you're replacing it with are identical in terms of their detail content. So the first step in all this stuff is to do something called histogram matching. This doesn't alter the image content. Histograms are made from binned data, and the bins are simply stretched, compressed, and not shifted one relative to the other. So you maintain a monotonic relationship between the two images. Very simple mapping. We don't add or subtract any information from the image. You just distribute it over a different range of grayscale. Here's a little program I ran for histogram matching. By the way, I couldn't find any such program available to the user, so I had to write one. It's in Python, and I'd be happy to share it with anyone who can run Python. But what it does is take a target image that's one of the two luminances. This is the extracted, L extracted. And then it takes a reference image. Let's say that's the L captured. And it makes the L extracted, it squishes and it expands the bins in the target image to match the image, the reference image. And it produces this. So the target becomes the match after running this program. And you can see the B, C, D, E, for instance, are in all three images have been shifted in the target image now to be at the distance and from each other and pretty close to the same height. There's the quantitative technique by Wang is called MSSSIM for short. It compares the structural content of two methods. Perceptual structural content or structural perceptual difference in that it looks for differences in the way a human would probably perceive these two images. It grades every pixel in one image compared to the other image on a scale of 0 to 1 on how much that image, how much that pixel resembles the pixel in the other image. It actually does this by measuring about 11 by 11 pixel range and saying how much does that group square of pixels resemble the pixels in the other image, and then assigning that value to the center of the pixel, sliding over one, measuring again, sliding over one, and etc. until it covers the entire pixel, the entire image. If a pixel value is found that is 0, it means that that 11 by 11 square had no match whatsoever to the other image. One image did not match the other image at all. If the number it outputs at the location is 1, it means those 11 by 11 pixels match each other perfectly in the two images. My implementation of this program, again, in Python, and again available if you want it, looked at the images at multiple resolution, taking an image at full resolution, downsampling by a factor of 2, analyzing the structural similarity at that, downsample again measure the similarity, and so on for down to 1/16th resolution, and getting a matching coefficient, an average matching coefficient across the entire image, as well as making a map of where the mismatches are between. 3 case studies: a bright nebula, a galaxy, and a dark nebula. They had varying degrees of image processing after stretching, and those processing was done either in PixInsight or in Topaz or both. Here's NGC 6357, a bright nebula. There were 3.3 hours of extracted L, extracted from the RGB, and then that's the equivalent, 3.3 hours equivalent of L. The L was actually captured separately, was 4 hours. The images were stretched, stars removed, noise removed, and gram matching, nothing else. So here's the similarity index for these images, all over 0.9, regardless of resolution, full resolution, on down to 1/16th resolution. And anything above 0.7 or 0.75 is considered a very good match. So this is bordering on a perfect match between the two in terms of the content of the two images. Therefore, if this were the level of processing you were doing, replacing the 3 hours of L that was already in the RGB image with the 4 hours of other data externally captured, separately captured L would be a waste of time. Here's the image processed, same image processed farther, more deeply, further, not farther. Same processing as the preceding image, plus having enhanced clarity, dehazing, and precision detail boosted in Topaz AI. The similarity scores show a drop in the similarity of 0.8 at the maximum resolution, but back up to a very high value at lower resolutions. Well, this is a little disturbing. It's certainly still a very, very good match, but we can understand it a little better in the next slide. Here's a blink of two slides that this slide with the boxes is one that shows the areas where the mismatches occurred. The second image, the wider one, is a similarity map. Remember, a similarity map is close to 1, where the similarity is very high, and close to jet black, where the similarity is very low. There's nothing near the jet black here, but by where the boxes are, we can see that the majority of the mismatched areas or least matched areas are in dark areas of the image. This is a known weakness of this matching technique, this quantitative matching technique, that it tends to be overly sensitive to dark areas, and smaller differences are flagged as significant in dark areas than similar differences in wider areas of the image. I think most of us would agree we're not too worried about what's in the dark sky. So I think that once again it shows that these are not images. They're very good. Yeah, very well. Let's go on with the galaxy. Here there is 1.5 equivalent hours of L extracted. That is 1.4 hours almost of R and the B, G and the B. And on the other hand, there are 5 hours of L captured. Here's the images being blinked. This is the captured just for reference. It's L captured. Here's the difference. Again, the difference is going to be 0 or plain gray, flat gray at about 0.5 if there are no significant differences between the images, and that image is indeed pretty well gray. But the measured similarity scores are not that good. Why? Well, the image has a lot of black around it. That sensitivity to black is throwing us off. You can see here this is a similarity map. White means perfect detail match. Black means very poor or imperfect RGB match. I'm sorry, detail match. And what we see is that all these black areas are up where we have empty sky. Even the stars match very well. But it's a mismatch, and as we said, algorithm tends to pick up very small differences as significant differences where the images are dark. Finally, a dark image, the Horsehead Nebula, and as in previous images, I'm blinking 2 images here. The comparison is between L captured and L extracted. And in this case, the L extracted is 4 hours of exposure time. You can think of that as 4 hours of R, 4B, 4B. The L captured is 14 hours, so its equivalent is far greater than the L extracted. This was sharpened in PixInsight and zoomed in a factor of 4. The overall similarity scores are extraordinarily high, despite the fact this is a dark image. So that's telling me that by the time we reach 4 hours of RGB, we've captured virtually all the image similarity that can possibly be, or the image data that can possibly be captured, and even adding 14 hours and more of L does nothing to that image whatsoever. The similarity scores are extraordinarily high. If we look at a similarity map of this one of the places we find a little bit of mismatches down here where the star has been replaced, the algorithm for doing that. star exterminator in this case. Therefore, we placed the star differently in the two different images. There are some differences we can see at the blinks, and that's because in this area here, that's because the histogram matching wasn't perfect. Okay, that's basically what I wanted to cover. Augmenting an RGB image with separately captured luminosity does not, in fact, enhance the detail of the RGB image when your alternative modern noise suppressing technology is applied to the image. This is consistent with the first part of the talk where I showed why L doesn't really add anything to the image. It simply reduces the noise and shows what is hiding behind the noise. However, my findings here are based on my use of a particular telescope type anyway, and a limited number of examples. Each image processor could and probably should conduct some sort of analysis that convince them, if they're not convinced by this presentation, that collecting L is not worthwhile for them. Of course, whether it is or isn't worthwhile will vary from person to person, or at least somewhat vary from person to person, depending on the equipment they use, their sky conditions, their image processing tools, techniques, capabilities, and many other things. And in some cases, you might find that collecting 20 minutes of R, G, and B each takes you to the limits of what detail you can possibly show in your images. Of course, if you're on top of some mountain in Chile, it may be 4 hours of R, G, and B telescope, or it may be 14 hours with some smaller, long length telescope or whatever. Each of those things is going to be up to you. Thanks very much.